Young athletes, big dreams, but do pitchers risk throwing it all away by pitching too hard and too often for their own good?
The more you throw, the more damage you can do, especially at a young age.
The Republican primary roadshow is coming to New York, but is anyone paying attention? We'll speak with New York One's political anchor, Errol Lewis, about the presidential election.
Meet Buddy Scotto, the man neighbors call the mayor of Carroll Gardens.
Without him, I doubt that we ever have an area called Carroll Gardens.
A green grocery is coming to the banks of the Gowanus. Will Whole Foods bring wholesale change to this once gritty neighborhood?
Funky shirts and cross-cultural puns, Spanish and English blend together. The result? Spanglish. I'm Sarah Pizan.
I'm Vincent Balistreri.
I'm Sarah Ewald.
I'm Lisa Friedman.
And I'm Sarah Kazadi. We'll have these stories next on 219 West. April means baseball, with Major League players getting back to work. Pitchers like the Mets' Johan Santana and the Nationals' Steven Strasburg are attempting to bounce back strong after off-season surgery on their throwing arms. So was the Yankees' Jabba Chamberlain before he injured his ankle. Many young players who idolize the pros could be facing that same challenge. The pint-sized uniforms and sunshine mean the Little League baseball season is in full swing.
My mom always told me school first and then do what you love, which is baseball. And it's finally good to see the weather clear up, and I'm playing now.
11-year-old Gianni Diaz has been playing since he was 4. He's one of the best pitchers on the East Harlem Warriors Little League team, and he has high hopes for the new season.
I'm pretty sure we're going to make it all the way.
Like Gianni, thousands of young pitchers nationwide will step on the mound this season with dreams of leading their teams to a Little League World Series win. But as they pitch, concerns about injuries will be pushed to the forefront. Pitching injuries have soared in the last 15 years, with some surgeons reporting a 7-fold increase in young patients. Pitching 100 innings a year, the equivalent of 11 full games, makes a player 3.5 times more likely to seriously injure his throwing arm and take a trip to the doctor's office.
When you throw, you bring your arm back in such an extreme position.
Orthopedic surgeon Tony Wanick has seen a sharp increase in the number of young athletes in his operating room. He recently issued a list of safety tips for young players. One of them is that practice doesn't always make perfect.
The more you throw, the more damage you can do, especially at a young age. Most of these injuries are due to overuse. There's so much emphasis on these young athletes to perform, in hopes of, scholarships, in hopes of, making on to professional leagues that, unfortunately, it's one of these sports where too much is not necessarily a good thing.
Dr. Wanick adds that overusing a young arm increases the likelihood of surgery in the future. It's no longer unusual to see high school and college pitchers undergoing the same surgeries as the pros. Pitcher Brandon Loban, a senior on the St. John's University baseball team, is one of them. The left-hander had shoulder surgery as a freshman.
It's the most dreadful experience that you can ever go through, coming back from injury.
Loban has worked his way back to the mound, a natural place for the New Jersey native. He's been throwing strikes since he was 6 years old and says baseball was a big part of growing up.
I played every other day. Sometimes I used to play 3 games Saturday, Sunday, and then 2 games on Friday.
Loban doesn't blame all that early time on the field for his shoulder injury. He says it helped him develop as a player and earn a scholarship.
If you're playing right and you're mechanically sound, I think that playing baseball is the only way to get better at it. And my parents did push me to play a lot, which I thank for them, because without that I wouldn't be able to be here where I am right now.
Back at the Little Leagues, young pitchers are hoping to play college ball eventually. That's why coaches at the East Harlem Little League hold pitching clinics to stress throwing the ball the right way and limit injuries.
If you're not throwing it properly, if you're not using your legs and you're not using the proper mechanics, then you can easily hurt yourself even faster.
Over at the Parkchester Little League in the Bronx, plenty of practice time goes to strengthening core muscles and boosting endurance.
They need to exercise and loosen up their rotator cuff so that they can perform the task that they're asking their body to do.
These coaches are working to protect young pitching arms, but so is the Little League as a whole. To slow the trend of injuries, Little League Baseball implemented this set of pitch rules in 2007. The rules were slightly modified in 2010. They basically limit the amount of pitches a kid can throw and make sure coaches keep player safety first. The pitch count limit varies by age group. Coaches could be suspended for not removing a pitcher after he has reached his maximum. But enforcing the rules can get tricky. Some players play for more than one team, which means they may throw more pitches. Also, a small survey of coaches concluded that many of them did not know all of the pitch count rules. Parkchester coach Dean Ricks says Little League organizations need to screen volunteer coaches carefully to make sure they know the rules and are taking care of their players.
Everyone is not a coach. They volunteer. In Little League, we volunteer to coach, but coaches have to be coached in order to be taught what to do and what not to do.
In addition to the pitch count, Little League Baseball has strongly advised against young pitchers throwing curveballs, but has not banned them. For years, curveballs have been blamed for tearing up young elbows and shoulders. But a study by the American Journal of Sports Medicine states that curves aren't more dangerous than any other pitch. The study has its critics both on and off the field.
A curveball thrown correctly may be okay. The problem is that most young people don't know how to throw a curveball correctly. They don't know how to throw a slider correctly. And so they try to exaggerate that motion, and that's what leads to the injuries.
Both the Parkchester and East Harlem Little Leagues don't teach their kids curveballs, preferring to be safe than sorry. However, many players learn elsewhere.
My dad told me how to throw a curveball, but I barely throw it because he told me that when you throw a curveball, it starts hurting your elbows and your shoulders, and you don't want to get hurt there, and that might mess up your career.
If they want to make their dreams of playing Major League ball come true, young pitchers will need to avoid career-threatening injuries. To protect their dreams, should curveballs be banned? Are stricter pitching rules needed? Coaches say no, the rules in place are fine, and team leaders have the responsibility of teaching proper mechanics to protect young arms for the future. Dr. Wanick believes banning curveballs for kids 12 and under and limiting play are steps in the right direction. As the debate continues, these young pitchers hope that when the umpire says, "You're out," it will be the batter, not the pitcher, heading off the field. Sarah Kazadi, 219 West.
The Republican presidential primary in New York is less than 2 weeks away. So where are all the colorful election posters, bumper stickers, and mean-spirited commercials? Do voters even know there's an election coming up?
Here in New York City, it's hard to find signs of the upcoming primary. The presidential candidates haven't been here, and there hasn't been any TV advertising. The campaign has been so quiet, some Republican voters are unaware that a primary is about to take place.
Well, I heard about them, but I'll be honest, I don't know much about them.
I know the guy with the R name, Romney.
I have to stick with the candidate of the Republican Party, whereas I am a Republican. Who are the two candidates that are running?
I don't think many New Yorkers are aware that there's a primary coming up in our state.
David Jones is a professor of political science at Baruch College in Midtown Manhattan.
I think part of the reason is that the candidates themselves haven't been making that much of a big deal of New York, and they probably weren't expecting New York to be that relevant from the beginning. A lot of people expected that the race might be over by now.
The presidential hopefuls have all fought hard to establish themselves as the most conservative candidate. But that might not be going over so well here in New York.
The Republican Party, particularly since 1980, has been shifting in terms of the issues that it emphasizes and the positions on those issues, particularly taking more solidly socially conservative positions, where New Yorkers have a more liberal view. You know, we had New Yorkers like Rockefeller, who also had similarly moderate to liberal positions on these social issues, and they could get elected here in New York. But that type of Republican really doesn't exist anymore.
Even with a high turnout, he warns that there is a very slim chance that New York will go to the Republicans in the general election this November.
He's not going to win New York in the general election. I'll buy you lunch if I'm wrong. New York is just a blue state, and if Obama can't win New York, then he's going to lose the election.
With me in the studio is Errol Lewis, political anchor for New York One. We're here to talk about the upcoming primary and presidential elections. According to the latest polls, Romney will win in New York, and he's certainly going to be the Republican nominee. In fact, he's already gearing up for the general election by attacking President Obama. So what will it take for Romney to win New York in the general election?
Oh, very good question. April 24th is when the primary season comes to New York. New York will be by far the biggest delegate prize on that day. Pennsylvania and some other states are going at the same time. For him to win New York, though, he's pretty much got to be more like the old Mitt Romney, the former governor from a northeastern state. Republicans here are moderate compared to the rest of the conservative base, and that's been the main dynamic of this race. How does Mitt Romney appeal to the conservative base? He doesn't have to go too far out of his way, I think, in this case. He's more of a known quantity here. The policies that he's championed are not all that unpopular, the ones that got him in trouble with the conservative base. So if he goes back to Mitt Romney circa 1994, 1996, he'll do just fine. And of course, he's already got a lot of support here, including from our former governor, George Pataki. So he's got a lot going for him right off the bat.
All right. So it seemed like throughout the primaries, Romney had some difficulty appealing to conservatives. So how else do you think he's going to win over the conservatives here in New York?
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, the conservatives arguably don't have anywhere to go. And Mitt Romney has appealed to the fact that the conservative leadership here, Mike Long, the chairman of the state Conservative Party, is a very practical man. He's already been sort of talking up Mitt Romney. And conservatives in this state really have done well by figuring out who the winner is going to be in the Republican Party and making some kind of accommodation. Sometimes that means there's an implied understanding that they'll get some jobs or that they'll take some policy positions. They're doing basically what responsible political leaders do, which is figure out where the winds are blowing and see if you can sort of catch that wind and take it in the direction that you want to go. So the conservatives here, the Conservative Party at least, I think, have already begun the process of making some kind of accommodation with Mitt Romney. Conservatives nationwide are going to do the same. The folks here, though, I think have gotten a head start.
All right. What do you think some of the issues are going to be on the table for New Yorkers in the general election? What are they going to care about?
Well, all of the polls say the same thing, which is jobs, jobs, and more jobs. And New York has a serious unemployment problem. There are really difficult issues to deal with in upstate New York, in the rural areas. The city itself, of course, is still hovering just under 10% unemployment, and much, much higher if you look at certain subgroups like teenagers, inner city kids, and so forth. So there's a real serious problem, and everybody is going to be looking to Washington to get it right, to pull the country and indeed New York State out of this recession that has been so crippling for the last few years. That's going to be the biggest issue by far. There will also be some related issues. I think healthcare is going to be a big question, in part depending on what the Supreme Court does. And then you've got the other perennial issues like education and issues like transportation that are important to New York City.
All right, so let's go back to that really quick. So the Supreme Court is due to rule on the mandate in June. How do you think that will play into the election?
Well, you know, I've heard a lot of different versions of this. One school of thought holds that if the Supreme Court strikes down the law, it will give the Democrats more of an issue to run on. They'll be able to say, look, this politicized court struck down this important law. We still have got millions of people who need insurance, so give me another term so I can put some better justices on the Supreme Court. The opposite school of thought says that you want to win, and so if the president gets a win from the Supreme Court, so to speak, meaning they let the law go forward, it actually deprives the Republicans of a big issue and lets them go forward, and they really won't be able to say this president's policies are at odds with the Constitution. So it could play out either way. My sense of it, though, is that this administration is really counting on a win from the Supreme Court. They're kind of hedging their bets in case they have to go to war with a negative decision, but I think they're going to really, really count on this being behind them by the time the election rolls around.
Well, we'll have to see how it goes. Errol Lewis, thanks so much for joining us in the studio.
My pleasure.
Buddy Scotto has lived in Carroll Gardens his whole life, and he's been a neighborhood activist since the mid-1960s. He's led cleanup efforts at the Gowanus Canal, founded a political organization, and even gave the area its name. People call him the mayor of Carroll Gardens.
Somebody stole the waste paper. I can't believe it.
I can't imagine that if you've lived in this neighborhood for any length of time, you don't know who Buddy is, or he hasn't said hello to you on the street and you to him. He is just gregarious in that way, and I think that's what helps make the neighborhood the neighborhood. If they know anybody in the neighborhood and Buddy is walking down the block, one of the older residents will say, "Oh, that's Buddy Scotto. He owns the funeral parlors. He's Mr. What do they call him? The mayor of Carroll Gardens."
I was born and raised right here, 102 First Place. That's just 2 houses down the block here. And spent my whole life here in actuality until the United States Army got involved. But before that, I grew up as a typical Italian-American in an Italian-American neighborhood. And we were very happy. It was a family-oriented neighborhood. Everybody knew everybody. We all cared about one another. I really got the notion of playing the part of an amateur planner for the neighborhood. In 1964, when I decided to get involved at a community level and become what most people would consider a community activist, I decided what could I do and what was possible to do to improve conditions in the neighborhood so people wouldn't have to flee to the suburbs.
Without him, I doubt that we'd ever have an area called Carroll Gardens. Buddy had a dream about renaming the area for the front gardens on the places in the first, second, third, fourth place and a few other places. And we went together and worked on getting the maps of the city changed to include Carroll Gardens as a distinct area. We set the boundaries for it. We made people in the area recognize that they lived in Carroll Gardens, and it was a great thing to live there. Primary issue I worked with Buddy on was the cleaning the Gowanus Canal.
I guess having had a college education and having had a course in bacteriology, I was a little bit sensitive to the possibility that this body of water that had been part of my neighborhood for my entire life was an important feature here as far as the image that this community had. And did a little bit of research, and once I was able to affect New York City Technical College, Dr. Gene Holker coming down doing water analysis for us, and it became obvious that we had diseases such as typhoid, typhus, and cholera, a virulent strain of cholera in the Gowanus Canal. Obviously, I felt we had to do something about that as a community. We got the resources to begin the cleanup of the canal in 1975, 1976. By the middle 80s, it was already cleaned. And we have now over 100 seniors living just a half a block up from the canal. So the canal is well on its way to being as clean a body of water as you could possibly get anywhere in New York City.
He was an environmentalist before there was a word for it. So nobody knew quite what he was doing, but that's what it was. He was planting trees in the neighborhood and hyper-focused on cleaning that canal.
The only person that I see taking his place is his daughter, Deborah.
I am currently running for district leader in the 52nd. I don't necessarily think he expected it, but I think he's kind of getting a kick out of it. Well, he's still got quite a bit of energy, and I could only hope to have the same.
Buddy certainly is getting older, but he's now in his mid-80s. However, I wouldn't try to hand wrestle with him. He's still a pretty tough guy. It's a model for anyone who wants to be a real activist and who's willing to put the time and effort in.
A lot of people don't realize how important he has been to Carroll Gardens and continues to be, and I don't think they really will until he isn't.
And when I'm dead and buried, the spirit of what we're all about here as Italian Americans, and working as hard as we're willing to work for the betterment of our community, like cleaning up the canal, planting trees, getting affordable housing, getting senior citizens housing, that's going to go on. I'm going to give you an ethnic expression. Forza Carroll Gardens.
Down the road from Carroll Gardens, condos are popping up around the Gowanus neighborhood in Brooklyn as the adjacent canal prepares for a major cleaning. But some residents are concerned about the future of the gritty, artistic streets below 4th Avenue. At the intersection of 3rd and 3rd, a stone's throw from the notoriously toxic Gowanus Canal, Whole Foods will build a 5,200 square foot store. With the arrival of the organic grocer, however, some fear that Gowanus's industrial culture will fade, and affordable housing will soon be hard to come by. A collective of artists has had a stable foothold at the old American Can Factory, directly across from the new Whole Foods site. Kellyanne Burns is one of those artists.
For me, my studio is like my sanctuary, and it's where I create my own kind of energy and home, and I don't want to be moving around, you know. I want to have that stability of where I come and think and work, you know, and it's, you know, you gotta live. You can't just have a space. You know?
Local officials are more upbeat. Craig Hammerman, director of Brooklyn 6 Community Board, which represents Gowanus, has high hopes for the space.
They're going to have a public esplanade along the Gowanus Canal, so people will actually be able to sit out there and passively enjoy the canal itself. And you know, they're really injecting a new presence into the Gowanus Canal that you know, we just want to do our best to make sure is a positive impact on the surrounding community.
The industrial nook has long lived in the shadows of its neighbors, Park Slope, Carroll Gardens, and even Red Hook. Google Maps doesn't even label the former shipping hub as its own neighborhood. So what is it that actually sets Gowanus apart?
Gowanus, unlike its surrounding neighborhoods, is not part of brownstone Brooklyn. Gowanus has a unique industrial heritage, and it's reflected in the architecture, it's reflected in the zoning, and it's reflected in, you know, who's doing business out there now.
Heritage and change that a lifetime resident like 62-year-old Vinny Stanzione knows a bit about. He still lives in the house his grandfather built on 8th Street.
When something like Whole Foods moves in, the price of your property goes up. 15 years ago, my house was worth $350,000, and right now, taxation and finance says that it's worth $1 million something.
Despite the rising real estate prices, there is still a glaring issue in Gowanus: the canal. For decades, the waterway has been polluted, though its 2010 Superfund status promised cleaner waters and less odor.
For the first time, during the summers especially, people could actually walk the bridges of the canal without holding their noses.
One hot day on the Gowanus Canal, and nobody will come near this place ever again.
Padula has a point. When a tornado touched down in Brooklyn in 2010, the canal backed up badly enough to send pungent waves of garbage and sewage up the canal. This amateur video documented the storm's aftermath.
Oh, used condom. You should have seen it. This was green. I saw the stripe. Yeah. Oh.
Nearly 18 months later, the canal is still an industrial site, and the studios in the Can Factory are still safe. But what happens to artists like Burns when prices spike?
I mean, we're not a rich bunch, but we do kind of, you know, I think we add to a neighborhood in the community. You know, 50 years from now, they'll be trying to make it a historic landmark and saying, well, this artist was here and this artist was here, but meanwhile, they were pushed out, you know. because that's the first thing that goes, you know, is the arts.
Gowanus could finally be coming into its own financially, but at what price?
10 years ago, we were calling this Park Slope 2 because we wanted to get in on the trend and we wanted to be considered very shishi also. But now, we don't have to do that. We're shishi just being Gowanus. When you see changes like this in an up-and-coming neighborhood, things happen and people have to leave.
In Brooklyn, Vincent Balistreri.
For one Mexican living in New York, building a brand is more than just a business. It's a way of life. He sells stylish t-shirts that provide a puntastic way to transmit positive messages and make an impact.
Well, the whole idea behind Spanglish is that it's a play of words. I'm basically using English to speak Spanish. It's about selling happiness, pero spicy. Finding a creative way to sell the message of happiness in using all the multicultural backgrounds that I have, which is a combination of Latin culture and American culture. For example, you put the word green and the word go, and it becomes gringo. But at the same time, it also represents going green. You're basically targeting the Latino that speaks fluent English, and it's a very unique humor because it's a combination of old school telenovelas with Saturday Night Live. Spanglish specifically was made to differentiate the cultures amongst Latinos, and the reason why it's been well received is because it's not just another Mexican t-shirt. It's a cultural t-shirt for Latinos, representing all Latinos, not just Mexicans. Spanglish started actually when I was in college in Washington, D.C. in 2006. After Hurricane Katrina, I decided to do a little fundraiser with my friends, made some t-shirts that said, "Do your part." And I gave them away to all my friends in college. Created a demand because everybody wanted to wear the cool design that I made. They realized that I had a talent for doing cool t-shirts and creating demand that people didn't know existed. That was my calling, to make t-shirts with a message. So I decided to follow my dream and made my t-shirts happen. You create designs, probably 5 to 10 designs a week.
The thing I really like about the t-shirt is, you know, every time I'm wearing one out, people always like stop me on the street and are like, "Oh my God, that's hilarious. Where'd you get that?"
Spanglish today has developed more than a t-shirt brand into a complete lifestyle of happiness and cultural awareness. It's very, very much about gratitude, of being grateful, which kind of goes along with awareness, because when you're grateful, you're aware, and then you're happy. Spanglish, always keep smiling.
The whole question of being happy and always be happy tagline that Spanglish has and that kind of Simon encapsulates. Seeing new designs coming out, you know, you get a chuckle, and that whole thing really is it's a nice reminder in the day-to-day that puts everything else into perspective, because really that is all that matters, is that you be happy.
My ultimate goal with Spanglish is to open retail stores all over the world. More than a retail store, a concept store. The biggest demand in the world. I mean, everybody wants more of happiness and more of love. So the whole point is to find creative ways to deliver messages that are going to add value to anyone's life. Yellow makes me happy. Yeah, it just makes me smile. I describe myself definitely a very successful person in the journey of happiness. Always keep smiling.
And that's it for this month's edition of 219 West from the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. Thanks for watching. I'm Sarah Pizan, and we'll be back next month with more stories from the 5 boroughs and beyond.